the album that changed everything. By the early 1980s, Michael Jackson was already one of the biggest names in popular music. His 1979 album Off the Wall had established him as a successful solo artist, producing multiple hit singles and earning widespread critical praise. Yet despite its commercial success, Michael was deeply disappointed that the album received only one Grammy Award. According to the transcript, he later described feeling ignored by the music industry and recalled telling himself that his next album would be impossible for people to overlook. That determination became the driving force behind what would eventually become Thriller. Rather than simply creating another successful record, Michael set out to produce an album that would redefine popular music itself. The source presents this moment as the beginning of an extraordinary ambition, one that would ultimately transform his career beyond anything anyone could have imagined. When Thriller was released, it exceeded even the highest expectations. The transcript describes how the album went on to become the best-selling record in history, reaching an estimated 100 million copies sold worldwide and establishing commercial records that, according to the source, remain unmatched. Songs like Billie Jean, Beat It, and Thriller became global phenomena, while Michael's performances, music videos, and innovative approach to visual storytelling permanently changed the entertainment industry. To the public, this appeared to be the greatest success any artist could ever achieve. Every award, every record broken, and every headline seemed to confirm that Michael Jackson had reached the absolute peak of popular music. According to the transcript, Thriller elevated him from an international superstar to a cultural phenomenon, unlike anything the music industry had witnessed before. But the transcript argues that hidden beneath this extraordinary success was the beginning of a much more complicated story. It suggests that Thriller did more than establish an impossible commercial benchmark for the entire music industry. It also created an impossible benchmark for Michael himself. Every future project, every new album, and every career decision would inevitably be measured against the unprecedented success of Thriller. Instead of becoming a destination, the album became the standard he felt compelled to surpass for the rest of his career. According to the source, this relentless pursuit of outperforming his own greatest achievement would influence professional relationships, creative decisions, and personal expectations for years to come. The album that gave Michael Jackson everything the music industry could offer also created pressures that few artists in history have ever experienced. And, as the next chapter reveals, escaping the shadow of Thriller would prove far more difficult than creating it in the first place, when success became impossible to escape. For most artists, creating the best-selling album in history would represent the ultimate achievement. But according to the transcript, Michael Jackson viewed Thriller very differently. Instead of seeing it as the finish line, he began treating it as the new minimum standard for everything that followed. The source explains that after Thriller's unprecedented success, Michael became determined to surpass his own accomplishment with every future project. What had once been an extraordinary victory gradually transformed into an expectation he placed upon himself. No matter how successful his next album might become, it would always be compared to the record that had already changed music history. According to the transcript, this relentless pursuit of outperforming Thriller became one of the defining pressures of Michael's career, creating a challenge that almost no other artist has ever faced. The transcript points to the release of Bad as one of the clearest examples of this growing pressure. At the time, Thriller had already sold tens of millions of copies worldwide, establishing a commercial benchmark unlike anything the music industry had seen before. Although Bad itself went on to become a massive international success, selling millions of copies and producing numerous hit singles, the source explains that Michael remained disappointed because it did not surpass Thriller. The transcript includes an account from his then-manager, Frank DeLeo, who reportedly told Michael that everyone involved had done the very best they could. According to the source, DeLeo was dismissed from his role only weeks later. Whether or not that decision resulted from a single conversation, the transcript presents it as an illustration of the enormous expectations surrounding Michael's pursuit of matching or exceeding Thriller. Success that would have defined almost any other artist's career no longer felt sufficient because the standard had become nearly impossible to reach. Looking back, the transcript argues that this was one of Thriller's most significant unintended consequences. The album had permanently altered the way the public, the music industry, and Michael himself measured success. Every future release faced comparisons that no ordinary record could realistically satisfy. Instead of competing against other artists, Michael increasingly found himself competing against his own greatest achievement. The source suggests that this mindset influenced many of the creative and professional decisions that followed throughout his career. Rather than allowing him to enjoy the accomplishment, Thriller became a constant reminder of a standard that seemed impossible to surpass. As the documentary continues, that relentless pursuit of excellence would extend beyond record sales and awards into Michael's personal relationships, including one friendship that began during the making of Thriller and would later become one of the most talked about business stories in music history. The friendship that success accidentally destroyed. During the recording of Thriller, Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney shared one of the most successful creative partnerships of the era. Both artists were already global superstars, and their collaboration on The Girl Is Mine reflected a friendship built on mutual admiration and a shared passion for music. According to the transcript, their conversations often extended beyond songwriting and recording sessions. During one of those discussions, Paul offered Michael advice that he believed every musician should understand. The true, long-term value of the music business wasn't limited to performing songs, it was in owning them. He explained the importance of music publishing and how the owners of song copyrights continue earning income whenever those songs are played on radio, television, in films, or in public venues. The transcript presents this conversation as a pivotal moment that would influence one of the biggest business decisions of Michael's career. Several years later, the opportunity to apply that lesson arrived. According to the transcript, the ATV Music Publishing catalog, which included publishing rights to hundreds of Beatles songs, became available for purchase. Paul McCartney hoped to regain ownership of the catalog he had helped create, but the asking price continued increasing. The source explains that Michael, whose financial position had been transformed by the extraordinary success of Thriller, entered the bidding process and ultimately purchased the catalog. From Michael's perspective, it represented a major business investment consistent with the advice Paul himself had once given him about the value of music publishing. But according to the transcript, the outcome deeply affected their friendship. Paul later expressed disappointment, explaining that while he accepted Michael's legal right to purchase the catalog, he became frustrated by later business interactions involving the songs. The source presents this as one of the unintended consequences of the financial opportunities created by Thriller's unprecedented success. The transcript emphasizes that Michael's decision was driven by business ambition rather than personal hostility. He viewed publishing ownership as an opportunity to strengthen his long-term position within the music industry and continued pursuing larger goals after the success of Thriller. Nevertheless, the purchase marked a turning point in one of the music world's most famous friendships. According to the source, what had begun as professional advice from one legendary artist ultimately became the foundation of a business decision that permanently changed their relationship. It serves as another example of the complex legacy left by Thriller. The album created enormous wealth and opportunities, but those same opportunities sometimes carried personal consequences that could never have been anticipated during the recording sessions. As the documentary continues, another relationship comes into focus, this time with producer Quincy Jones, whose extraordinary partnership with Michael helped create Thriller itself, but who would eventually face his own challenges in the years that followed, when even Quincy Jones could no longer keep up. When people speak about Thriller, two names are almost always mentioned together: Michael Jackson and producer Quincy Jones. Their creative partnership produced three of the most celebrated albums in popular music history: Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad. According to the transcript, their relationship between the two was built on mutual respect, relentless perfectionism, and a shared belief that every recording should push the boundaries of what popular music could become. During the making of Thriller, both men challenged one another creatively, refining every arrangement, performance, and production detail until they believed it met an exceptionally high standard. The source presents this partnership as one of the greatest collaborations the music industry has ever witnessed. Yet, after Thriller changed the world, the expectations surrounding every future project became dramatically different for everyone involved, including Quincy Jones himself. According to the transcript, Michael's determination to surpass Thriller intensified with each new recording. Success no longer meant creating another excellent album. It meant producing something that could exceed what many already considered the greatest pop album ever made. The source suggests that this relentless pursuit of perfection gradually created increasing pressure within the creative process. Every musical decision, every production choice, and every song was measured against the extraordinary benchmark established by Thriller. While Bad became a massive international success in its own right, the transcript explains that Michael remained focused on the fact that it had not surpassed his previous achievement. The source presents this period as evidence that the standard created by Thriller had become so extraordinary that even one of the most accomplished producers in music history found it impossible to recreate the same unprecedented commercial phenomenon. The challenge was no longer simply making great music, it was attempting to outperform history itself. Looking back, the transcript argues that this illustrates one of Thriller's greatest unintended consequences. It permanently changed the expectations surrounding everyone who worked with Michael Jackson. Producers, executives, collaborators, and Michael himself all found their future work judged against an achievement that may never be repeated. The source does not suggest that Quincy Jones became any less talented or that their creative partnership lost its brilliance. Instead, it argues that the extraordinary success of Thriller created a benchmark so exceptional that repeating it became virtually impossible for anyone. In that sense, Thriller transformed not only Michael Jackson's career, but also the environment in which every future creative decision would be made. As the documentary continues, however, the pressure extended far beyond recording studios. According to the transcript, the unprecedented fame created by Thriller also transformed Michael's personal life, bringing an intensity of public attention that became increasingly difficult to escape. The fame that left. Michael with no place to hide. Success usually brings greater freedom, but according to the transcript, the unprecedented success of Thriller had the opposite effect on Michael Jackson. Before the album's release, he was already an internationally recognized performer, admired for his talent and respected throughout the music industry. After Thriller, however, he became something entirely different. The source describes how Michael's fame expanded to a level that few public figures had ever experienced, transforming him into one of the most recognizable people on the planet. Wherever he traveled, enormous crowds gathered. Every appearance attracted worldwide media attention, and even ordinary moments of daily life became international news. According to the transcript, the success that fulfilled Michael's greatest professional ambition also dramatically reduced his ability to enjoy the simple freedoms that most people take for granted. Privacy gradually became one of the rarest things in his life. The transcript explains that this constant public attention extended far beyond concerts and official appearances. Michael's clothing, friendships, travel, creative decisions, and personal habits all became subjects of relentless media coverage. Every photograph generated speculation, every interview was analyzed in detail, and every rumor spread rapidly across newspapers and television programs around the world. According to the source, living under this level of scrutiny created pressures that became increasingly difficult to escape. Unlike many celebrities who could step away from public attention between projects, Michael's global recognition meant there was rarely a moment when he was completely outside the spotlight. The transcript presents this as one of the hidden costs of Thriller's extraordinary success. The album had not simply created the world's biggest pop star, it had created a level of fame that permanently changed the way Michael experienced everyday life. Looking back, the transcript argues that this transformation illustrates why Thriller became both Michael Jackson's greatest triumph and one of his greatest personal challenges. The album opened opportunities no artist had ever experienced, but it also introduced a level of public attention that almost no individual could fully prepare for. Every future achievement, every personal decision, and every creative project unfolded under the constant observation of millions of people around the world. According to the source, Michael never stopped pursuing artistic excellence, but the environment surrounding that pursuit had changed forever. The freedom that once allowed him to focus entirely on music gradually became intertwined with the demands of worldwide celebrity. As the documentary continues, another consequence of Thriller becomes clear. It was no longer only Michael's daily life that had changed. It was the impossible expectations that now followed every album, every performance, and every career decision he would make for the rest of his life. Part 6. Why every new album was compared to Thriller. Before Thriller, Michael Jackson was competing against the biggest artists in popular music. After Thriller, according to the transcript, he found himself competing against only one person, himself. The album's unprecedented commercial success fundamentally changed the way every future release would be judged. Instead of asking whether a new album was successful, critics, executives, and fans began asking a different question. Was it better than Thriller? The transcript argues that this comparison became almost impossible to escape. It no longer mattered that Michael continued producing chart-topping records and internationally successful albums. Every achievement was measured against an album that had already rewritten the history of the music industry. What had once been an extraordinary accomplishment gradually became the benchmark by which the rest of his career would be evaluated. The source points to the release of Bad as the clearest example of this challenge. Commercially, the album became one of the biggest releases of its era, selling millions of copies worldwide and producing a remarkable run of successful singles. By almost any industry standard, it represented an extraordinary achievement. Yet, according to the transcript, public conversation rarely focused on what Bad accomplished on its own. Instead, much of the discussion centered on whether it had surpassed Thriller. The transcript explains that Michael himself felt this pressure intensely. Rather than celebrating the enormous success of another global hit album, he remained focused on the fact that it had not exceeded the commercial performance of its predecessor. The source suggests that this pattern would continue throughout the remainder of his recording career, with each new project facing expectations created not by the marketplace but by the unprecedented success of Thriller. Looking back, the transcript argues that this endless comparison became one of the greatest burdens created by Thriller. Most artists dream of producing one timeless classic, but Michael's greatest triumph also became the standard that overshadowed every future accomplishment. Albums that would have defined almost any other career were often discussed primarily in relation to the record that came before them. According to the source, this illustrates the extraordinary position Michael Jackson occupied within popular music. His greatest competition was no longer another performer or another record label. It was the legacy of his own masterpiece. In many ways, Thriller had become both the greatest achievement of his career and the highest expectation he would spend the rest of his life trying to meet. As the documentary continues, however, the transcript suggests that the commercial pressure was only part of the story. Behind the record-breaking sales and worldwide acclaim was a far more personal cost, one that affected Michael far beyond the recording studio. The personal cost of global superstardom. To millions of fans around the world, Thriller represented the ultimate dream. It brought record-breaking success, worldwide recognition, and transformed Michael Jackson into the biggest entertainer on the planet. But according to the transcript, that same success also created pressures that few people outside his inner circle could fully understand. Fame on this scale meant that Michael was no longer simply a musician releasing albums. He had become a global symbol whose every decision attracted worldwide attention. Ordinary activities that most people never think twice about, traveling, shopping, visiting friends, or spending time with family, often required extensive planning because enormous crowds and constant media attention followed wherever he went. The transcript argues that the freedom Michael once enjoyed gradually disappeared, as Thriller elevated him to a level of celebrity that had almost no historical precedent. The source explains that this extraordinary visibility affected far more than Michael's public appearances. Every creative decision became a headline. Every personal choice became a subject of public discussion. Newspapers, television programs, and photographers followed nearly every aspect of his life, creating an environment in which privacy became increasingly difficult to maintain. According to the transcript, Michael continued striving for artistic excellence despite these pressures, but the demands of worldwide superstardom added a constant layer of expectation that extended beyond music itself. Success had created opportunities beyond anything he had imagined, yet it had also placed him under continuous observation. The transcript presents this as one of the hidden consequences of Thriller. The album that fulfilled Michael's greatest professional ambition also dramatically changed the way he experienced everyday life, making it increasingly difficult to separate the performer from the private individual. Looking back, the transcript suggests that this personal cost is an important part of understanding Michael Jackson's story. His achievements remain among the greatest in entertainment history, but they also came with responsibilities and pressures that continued growing alongside his success. Rather than viewing Thriller simply as a commercial triumph, the source encourages audiences to consider the human experience behind the headlines, the reality of living under expectations that never seem to diminish. According to the transcript, Michael's extraordinary work ethic enabled him to continue creating music that inspired audiences around the world, but the personal sacrifices required by that level of fame were significant. As the documentary moves toward its conclusion, another consequence of Thriller comes into focus. The greatest challenge was no longer managing success itself. It was carrying expectations that no artist, no matter how talented, could reasonably be expected to fulfill for the rest of a lifetime. The expectations no artist could ever meet. By the late 1980s, Michael Jackson had reached a position that almost every artist dreams of, but very few would ever want to live through. According to the transcript, Thriller had become far more than a successful album. It had become the benchmark by which the entire music industry measured excellence. Every record label wanted another Thriller. Every journalist wanted to know whether Michael could repeat it. Every fan hoped his next project would somehow surpass what many already considered the greatest pop album ever made. The transcript argues that these expectations grew so enormous that they eventually became impossible to satisfy. No matter how many records Michael continued selling or how many stadiums he filled, conversations often returned to the same comparison. Instead of asking whether his newest work was remarkable, people asked whether it had eclipsed Thriller. According to the source, that question followed him for the rest of his career. The transcript explains that this pressure extended beyond the public and into the music industry itself. Every album release became a global event. Every music video was expected to redefine entertainment once again, and every performance carried expectations, shaped by the unprecedented success of the early 1980s. The source suggests that Michael himself accepted many of these expectations, continually pushing for larger productions, greater innovation, and higher artistic standards. Rather than repeating past successes, he searched for new ways to surprise audiences and expand the possibilities of popular music. Yet the transcript argues that even extraordinary creativity faced an almost impossible challenge. When an artist has already produced what many regard as the most successful album in history, any future achievement is inevitably viewed through the lens of that earlier masterpiece. The standard itself had become almost unreachable, not because the later work lacked quality, but because Thriller had permanently reshaped public expectations. Looking back, the transcript presents this as one of the central paradoxes of Michael Jackson's career. The album that secured his place among the greatest entertainers of all time also created a level of expectation that few human beings could realistically fulfill. Every new project arrived carrying the weight of history before audiences even heard the first song. According to the source, this helps explain why discussions about Michael's later career often focused less on what he accomplished and more on whether he had repeated the extraordinary phenomenon of Thriller. In many ways, the album became both his greatest achievement and his greatest measuring stick. As the documentary approaches its final chapter, one important question remains. If Thriller brought both extraordinary triumph and extraordinary pressure, should it ultimately be remembered as Michael Jackson's greatest victory, or as the greatest challenge he spent the rest of his life trying to overcome? That is the question explored next. Was Thriller Michael's greatest victory or his greatest challenge? After exploring every chapter of this story, one question remains at the center of the transcript. How should Thriller ultimately be remembered? On one hand, it transformed Michael Jackson into the most recognizable entertainer on earth. It broke commercial records, redefined the music video, elevated pop music to new artistic heights, and became the best-selling album in history. On the other hand, the transcript argues that the album also became the source of pressures and consequences that followed Michael for the rest of his career. It describes broken friendships, creative frustration, impossible expectations, legal disputes involving later collaborators, and a level of fame that permanently altered his personal life. According to the source, these outcomes were never caused by the music itself, but by the extraordinary scale of Thriller's success and the enormous business ecosystem that grew around it. Throughout the documentary, the transcript returns to a consistent theme. Once Thriller became the biggest album in the world, everyone connected to it found themselves living in its shadow. Michael measured every new project against it. Friends such as Paul McCartney saw their relationship change after business opportunities created by Thriller's financial success. Quincy Jones later became involved in royalty disputes concerning projects built around the music they had created together. Contributors including Vincent Price, Ola Ray, and John Landis each experienced their own complicated relationships with the album's long-term commercial success. The transcript presents these stories not to diminish Thriller's artistic achievement, but to illustrate how one extraordinary creative work can continue affecting the lives of everyone associated with it for decades. According to the source, the album became much larger than any individual person who helped create it. Perhaps that is the conclusion the transcript ultimately reaches. Thriller was both Michael Jackson's greatest victory and his greatest challenge. Without it, he might never have become the global cultural icon remembered today. Yet without it, he also might never have carried the impossible burden of trying to exceed the most successful album ever made. The source concludes by reflecting on a broader lesson that extends beyond Michael Jackson himself. Creating something truly extraordinary often means living with its consequences for the rest of your life. Great success can bring admiration, opportunity, and lasting influence, but it can also create expectations that no one can realistically fulfill forever. In the final chapter, the documentary steps back from the personal struggles and asks one last question. After everything Thriller accomplished and everything it demanded, why does it still stand as one of the greatest achievements in the history of music? Why Thriller still defines Michael Jackson's legacy? More than 4 decades after its release, Thriller continues to occupy a place in popular culture that few works of art have ever achieved. According to the transcript, its influence extends far beyond record sales or chart positions. The album transformed the way music was written, produced, marketed, and experienced around the world. It elevated the music video into a cinematic art form, introduced new standards for global album promotion, and demonstrated that popular music could unite audiences across cultures and generations. The source argues that while countless successful albums have been released since then, none has quite replicated the combination of artistic innovation, commercial impact, and cultural influence that Thriller achieved. Its legacy is not defined only by what it accomplished in 1982, but by the fact that it continues inspiring artists, filmmakers, producers, and audiences decades later. Throughout this documentary, the transcript has explored both sides of Thriller's remarkable story. It celebrated the album's historic achievements while also examining the immense expectations and personal pressures that followed its unprecedented success. The source suggests that these two realities cannot be separated. Without Thriller, Michael Jackson might never have become the defining global entertainer of his generation. At the same time, without Thriller, he might never have carried the burden of constantly being compared to his own greatest achievement. According to the transcript, this paradox is precisely what makes the album's story so compelling. It was simultaneously a creative masterpiece, a commercial phenomenon, and the beginning of a lifelong challenge that shaped the remainder of Michael's career. Every triumph and every obstacle that followed can, in some way, be traced back to the extraordinary impact of this single record. Ultimately, the transcript concludes that Thriller should not be remembered as the worst thing that happened to Michael Jackson because of the music itself. Rather, it presents the album as a reminder that extraordinary success often brings extraordinary consequences. The same achievement that opened limitless opportunities also created pressures unlike anything the entertainment industry had witnessed before. Yet despite those challenges, Thriller remains one of the greatest artistic accomplishments in modern history. More than 40 years later, its songs continue reaching new generations. Its videos continue influencing filmmakers, and its innovations continue shaping popular music. According to The Source, that enduring influence is the true measure of Michael Jackson's legacy. Records may eventually be broken, trends may change, and new artists will rise, but Thriller continues standing as a landmark that redefined what was possible in popular entertainment. That is why, after all these years, it still defines Michael Jackson's legacy, and why it continues to inspire the world today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the remarkable stories behind music's greatest legends. Until next time, thank you for watching.